One of the biggest downsides of the US dollar is that it makes it extremely difficult to plan for the future. You have to invest, you can't save, you have to put your money in this kind of account or this kind of account where you'll get a certain amount of interest. All of this makes it extremely complicated for people to put away money and savings for their future, and it makes them struggle at that point in their life. In this video, I want to talk to you about how Bitcoin solves this problem and why I think you should be saving in Bitcoin over US dollars. Let's get started. This is a basic chart showing you the purchasing power of $1 US over time. We can see that the amount of things that you can purchase with the US dollar are just decreasing and decreasing. And that's not because the things that you're trying to buy are getting more valuable. It's because the US dollar is losing value. So you can exchange fewer US dollars for the things that you want because more and more dollars are being created and added to the economy. This chart is a great explanation of why this is happening. This is the US M2 money supply, and it shows you how many dollars are in the system. So we can see here in 1959, January 1959, there were $286.6 billion in the system. Today, there are $21.4 trillion in the system. So this number has gone up by about 70 to 80 times, while on the other hand, the population of the US hasn't increased by 70 to 80 times in that period. We can see from this chart here that it seems like the average growth in the population in the US seems to be around 1 to 2%, maybe a little bit lower than that. But the chart that I showed you with the M2 money supply, that was increasing by 7 to 10% per year. So what's happening here is that the number of people who want dollars isn't increasing, but the number of dollars in the system keeps rising exponentially. And we can go right back to that chart here. We can see that in 2020, we saw a massive increase in the number of dollars that existed. The number of dollars in the system went from 15.4 trillion all the way up to 18.1 trillion within just a couple of months. This is a change of 2.7 trillion dollars. We can see here that it took from the beginning of when the US was created, I believe that was in 1776 when the dollar was created, until November 1986 to get to $2.7 trillion in the system. On the other hand, in this period here, we can see that that amount was created within just a few months, from February all the way till May. So what the Federal Reserve did was it flooded the financial system with money. More people had money, and those people could spend those dollars on whatever they wanted. A lot of this money was used to stimulate the economy. It was given to companies. It was given to individuals. A lot of dollars were given to people as basically a stimulus package. They were receiving 1,400, 1,200, 600, whatever the amounts were, but they received money and then they could use that money to go into the economy and spend it. I'm personally in Canada and I saw people getting paychecks for doing nothing. They were sitting at home. They weren't being productive. They were creating nothing, but they were consuming. And this is what caused prices to rise significantly. I would be surprised if anybody could tell me that their grocery bill hasn't gone up at least 50 to 75% since 2020. And the reason for that, of course, again, comes right back to this chart here where the amount of money in the system increased. It doesn't just go through the economy right away. It takes some time. And that's why we saw this change impact us so badly over the last 5 years. All of that money was added to the economy within just a few months. So more and more people became millionaires, more and more people had savings. They could spend all of that money on the things that they wanted or the things that they needed. So people were buying bigger houses, they were buying a lot of cars. We saw the price of housing rise significantly. We saw the price of cars rise significantly. Even used cars were becoming almost like an asset. So now back to the point of this video. Saving in the US dollar and planning for the future is extremely difficult because you have no idea how many dollars will exist in the future. We have no idea how many things the dollar will buy. So at some point in 1913, $1 bought 30 Hershey's chocolate bars. Today, you can barely buy one Hershey's chocolate bar with $1. And on top of this, we get better at producing things over time. We have robots, we have machines, but at the same time, these things are getting more expensive, even though they're becoming more abundant, even though we're getting better at producing them. The only reason for this is because the dollar can be created out of nothing. We can add more and more dollars to the system. And what this does is it makes it very difficult for you to plan for the future. So you can't save for the future. You have no idea how much money you need to survive 30, 40, 50 years down the line because you don't know how much the price of these things will be. The Federal Reserve will tell you that inflation is 2%. The US government will say that it's 1%. Whatever the numbers are, they'll lie to you when the reality is your cost of living should be coming down. You have to account for the productivity growth that's leading to more products being added to the economy. When more things are being added to the economy, those things should become cheaper because they become more abundant. So when you consider that inflation is 2%, you also have to consider how many more things have been added to the economy and how much prices should have instead fallen. I know a lot of Bitcoiners say that inflation has been 10, 15, 20% over the last few decades. So we can see from this chart here that the amount of money in the system is growing by about 7 to 10% per year. So if you're putting money in your bank account, in your high yield savings account, however you're putting your money away for the future, if you're not receiving enough money to make up for the amount of money being printed, you're losing. Your basic assumption when you're growing up is probably going to be that if you just hold on to dollars at some point, you'll be able to retire. You'll be able to have enough savings so that at some point you no longer have to work. You can just rely on your savings. But that's not true at all because over time, your cost of living is going to increase so much that your savings, your dollars that you're putting away, are going to buy next to nothing. And this is what makes it so difficult to plan for the future. If you don't have access to assets like stocks and real estate, then you can't save for the future. You're going to go broke no matter what because banks are going to create more and more dollars until the savings that you have are worthless. So on top of doing everything right, you have to decrease your expenses, you have to increase your income, and you have to put away the savings into a savings account. You can't spend those. You have to delay gratification. You also have to learn how the stock market works and how the real estate market works, because if you don't, you're going to be left behind. Now, this is where Bitcoin comes in. If you just save in Bitcoin, you're going to be able to retire without having to buy stocks and real estate and bonds, because nobody can create more Bitcoin and add it to the eventual 21 million total supply. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. And if you have a small portion of that, eventually that portion is going to be worth more and more and more in terms of goods and services, because those goods and services can be created at will, but Bitcoin can't. And now we go to this chart here. If you're buying Bitcoin with a 4-year time horizon, you're buying the least risky asset in the world, because over 4-year periods, Bitcoin's price only goes up. In the short term, you might see these movements up and down. The day-to-day movements may scare you. You may not want to hold through them. But if you look at this from a long-term perspective, there's no way to look at this other than pretty much guaranteed growth, because Bitcoin has a finite supply while the US dollar doesn't. The amount of US dollars that can enter the system and chase Bitcoin will continue to increase forever, while the amount of Bitcoin in the system will not increase forever. People are buying Bitcoin and they're never selling it again. They're locking it away forever. So what you're seeing here is higher highs and higher lows. So higher high from here to here to here. Then we have higher lows from the bottom here in 2015 to the bottom here in 2018 to 2019 to the bottom here in 2020 to now the bottom here in 2022 to 2023. Over time, we will see volatility. We will see Bitcoin's price go up, come down, go up, come down. And to me, that's perfectly fine. I like the volatility because it gives me the opportunity to create value. And when Bitcoin's price drops, I can exchange that value for more Bitcoin. The purchasing power of my value increases, and I don't see that being a problem. If you can hold your Bitcoin for 4 or more years, I think you're putting yourself in a great financial position. This is why Bitcoin allows you to save and plan for the future. In the dollar system, you have no idea what your dollars will purchase for you in 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. In terms of Bitcoin, you know for a fact that your purchasing power is going to increase no matter what over the next 4, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 years. And at some point, you'll probably be able to pass that Bitcoin on to your kids, your grandkids, whoever comes after you, so that you can set them up with a much better life than what you started off with. If you pass Bitcoin on to your children, what you can do is you can help them to surpass the capital preservation stage of life, which is usually the most difficult because that's the time when you have to delay gratification. That's the time when you can't do the things that you want to because you need to save for the future. You're allowing them to surpass that stage. So if they want to, they can go right into enjoying their lives. And the only reason why this can happen is because you put away some of your wealth, you delayed gratification, and you passed it on to your children who can now survive based on your hard work in the past. So with Bitcoin, planning for the future becomes a lot easier. You know for a fact that in the short term, it will be very volatile. The price will come down, it'll go up, it'll come down, it'll go up, but eventually the price will go up. And you know for a fact that 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, 16 years from now, you're going to have at least a little bit more wealth than you have today. If you're planning to have kids, buy a house, buy a car, whatever you want to do, if you save in US dollars, you're going to have a very difficult time predicting where prices will be in the future. While if you save in Bitcoin, you know for a fact that the price of everything will come down. Today, a house costs something like 4 or 5 Bitcoin, but eventually that house will cost you 1 Bitcoin, then 0.5 Bitcoin, then 0.25 Bitcoin. It'll keep decreasing because the number of Bitcoin in the system is finite, while the number of houses in the system can grow forever. So, for example, if you wanted to save 0.1 or 0.01 Bitcoin for your kids and you want to help them plan for their future, I think you're setting them up for a really great life. On the other hand, if you were to save $100,000, you have no idea what that $100,000 will purchase in 10, 20, or 30 years because you have no idea how many dollars will exist. So get used to saving in Bitcoin and planning for the future with Bitcoin because the dollar isn't going to take you very far. If you're saving in Bitcoin, you're probably going to end up with a much better standard of living than somebody who saves in dollars.